Thank you. Before I get into the brief history portion, I used email to document this disease process, and I was curious if I could see a show of hands of how many people either received the emails or perhaps read the compiled Ilene letters. Oh, good. So some of this is going to be a repeat for a number of you. So I will take that into account as I adjust my remarks on the fly. Ilene was a pretty private person, and she didn't disclose any of this until we really got in to find out what was happening on this thing. And when it came up, it was fast, and so I mentioned this in the emails, but I really wouldn't want anybody offended by the idea that I either didn't send them out to you or didn't ask. It was a list that people normally had to ask to come on it, just because cancer is such a scary subject that, for lack of a better description, we didn't really want to bum anybody out. So that's how that list grew, and these materials are all downloadable. There'll be videotape of this service uploaded to the web. There are the Ilene letters are downloadable, and there are links to both music videos that we're going to show today. And those conveniently are at a website called trentblackburn.com. So I know it's an obscure title, but you can probably remember that if you want to look at the stuff online. I'm not going to give too much of her early history because I don't know too much of it. That'll probably be addressed by her siblings. But I can tell you she was born in Spokane, and she was kind of born there under unusual circumstances. Her parents are Japanese American, as most of you know. And they were allowed to move from Idaho to Spokane shortly before she was born. As I understand it, they moved to Seattle about 6 months after that. She grew up there. She graduated from Franklin High School in 1963. She then went, I think, for a few quarters to the University of Washington, but she did the bulk of her higher education at UPS in Tacoma. She interned in Palo Alto at a psychiatric facility, and she also interned at a VA hospital in West LA. There is one detail of her childhood that I do recall, and when she was an elementary school child, one of her classmates called her a Jap, and she decked him. So, as I mentioned in her obituary, she was sweet and compassionate, but she was no pushover, and prudent people did not mess with her. So, this little white boy wasn't too prudent, and he paid the price. In terms of her last couple years, we moved from the Seattle area to the Kitsap Peninsula in 1998. Ilene worked over there first as a home health care occupational therapist, and then she worked for about 7 years part-time at the Washington Veterans Hospital as an occupational therapist. She retired in May of 2011, and then we had retirement plans like most people do, and that kind of went off the rails in February of 2012 when one of her lungs spontaneously collapsed. She had a condition called pulmonary fibrosis. It was scar tissue of the lungs, and it was stopping the lungs from exchanging gases with the environment, so she was going to slowly asphyxiate over a 2 to 3 year period. In late March, that's when this small cell lung cancer first showed up. It's a very aggressive, very fast-moving cancer, and it moves through the blood, so they know that when they find it someplace, it's going to be in a number of places. We came to eventually see that as a blessing because it took her window of suffering from this big and it compressed it. And her last 4 days were quite comfortable. She was lucid to the end. She had little or no nausea in the end, and Brain cancer especially has a real nausea component to it, as does the chemo. She was off chemo by that time. And she was in very little pain, so she had just minuscule pain meds, and she basically went out the way that she planned. So you can argue with reality, but you only lose every time. So that's how it unfolded. I'm going to introduce the first music video. We've got two music videos that she wanted to have played. The first one came out when she was a senior in high school by a singer named Little Peggy March. That was her actual music name. I can't say that I know much about her apart from the fact that I presume she was little. This isn't the version. The version Eileen liked was from the movie Sister Act, and it's got really nice female chorals in it. And so if you're ready up there, you can roll the first video. I should mention too that when we tested this video, they actually have a pretty challenging job up there because there's no monitor up there that shows them what's on the screen, so they're going to be aiming for pretty small icons with a mouse pointer that I can't even see from up there. So this will take as long as it takes, but they're doing fine, and they work in a challenging environment for this.
touched my heart, I knew there isn't an ocean too deep, a mountain so high it can keep me away. follow him wherever he may go. There isn't an ocean too deep, a mountain so high it can keep me away. We'll follow him wherever he may go. There isn't an ocean too deep, a mountain so high it can keep us away, away from his love. Oh, yeah. Oh, yes, I love him. I'll follow. I'm gonna follow. Sure enough. He'll always be my true love. From now until forever. Yes, I love him.
I fact-checked that video afterwards, and I'm pretty sure that wasn't the real Pope. So just, little-known facts. First little-known fact is I've been coming to family functions for about 35 years, and this is the most white people I've ever seen. True story, one of the first formal functions I went to after we got married was my parents-in-law's 50th wedding anniversary. It was held at this large banquet room on Lake Union. It was a little unclear how to get to the banquet room from the front doors to the building, so one of my nephews and I, that thug right there, we were kind of like the doormen to tell them where to go. And you got to picture this large banquet area, and there was one other white person in there. It was a schoolmate of Dr. Fukuda's from Broadway High School, which old Seattle history. So we come up after everybody's gotten out of their cars, and we sit down, and there's some pretty puzzled looks around the room, and I'm just kind of thinking to myself that they're thinking probably, boy, those Fukudas, look at that, they're having the doorman sit at their table with them. So when I decided I wanted to marry Ilene, I talked it over with her, and I chose to petition her parents in writing for their permission. A little risky, not a requirement, and it's always easier to get forgiveness than it is permission. And I probably oversold it a little bit because earlier that decade I was a ballistics tech at the FBI laboratory. After I left the FBI, I got my employee file through the Freedom of Information Act, and I took the segment out that had the summary results of my background investigation, and I attached that to the wedding petition. So I'm not sure what I was thinking. Perhaps it was, well, at least they'll know that I'm not a serial killer or something like that. And, you know, things were different back then. To use the FBI to establish credibility now would be like going on the Jerry Springer show to save your marriage. Not really a viable plan. Anyway, they met with her one weekend, and then they met with us both the next weekend. They saw it for what it was. It was a show of respect. And they backed me up from that day forward. And on that day, I made Dr. Fukuda 2 promises man to man. The first promise is that I would protect and serve his daughter through whatever life, however it unfolded and however it looked. So with the conclusion of today's service, that promise is fulfilled. The second promise I made to him was akin to an oath of fealty from practiced in medieval Europe. and I promised him that I would serve and protect his family to the best of my ability, and that promise will terminate when this body dies. So none of that changes. Ilene was a hand therapy specialist, besides kind of a subspecialty of occupational therapy. She did lots of free service for people. She made these splints out of this really expensive material with certain thermal properties to it. She could bend it and shape it in such a way. And she treated lots of people, friends with no insurance. One time we were in eastern Montana where my mother was born, and there's a large Hutterite community there, kind of similar to the Amish. I'm not sure the genesis of the Hutterites, but one of my family friends was kind of like the town liaison with them. So Ilene treated the head pastor's wife with therapy. So that was kind of an interesting experience going there. As I mentioned in her obituary, she also treated Ram Dass when he was in town. Ram Dass did, the former Richard Alpert, he was head of the psychology department at Harvard, and one day he woke up and realized that what he was teaching from his perspective was a sham, so he pulled up stakes, went to India, and he kind of became a bridge between Western and Eastern thought. He was in town for a fundraiser. He started a nonprofit called Seva, Sanskrit term for service. And they've done a number of projects, but their project then was they were delivering thousands of cataract surgeries at a cost of about $20 per surgery to people in the Himalayas, where because of the high altitude, a lot of UV, and consequently lots of cataracts, and because of my own eye issues, that's always been kind of an issue for us, and I had the honor to be his driver when he was in town, so he complained of probably some arthritic elements in his hand, and Ilene took care of it for him. She played a computer game to de-stress and called Free Cell, and the usual perception is computer games are a waste of time. It's kind of sad commentary that the most popular game in America sold $800 million worth of sales in its first day a couple months ago. And with that game, you can steal cars, shoot people with up to 15 different types of weapons, and you can even beat up and kill prostitutes if you want. My scene is that that probably reflects something in the American pathos, but that's not the game that Ilene played. And so there's a woman here, Dr. Helen B., that gave a seminar to us in the early 90s and taught us about the concept of flow. Flow is a state of consciousness. The term was coined by Hungarian psychologist Mihaly, with a really long last name. And the idea is that when you step into a state of flow, it really is a shift of consciousness. There's kind of a sense of timelessness. There's like a positive feeling that comes in. It quiets the mind. And because we were both aware of what flow looked like, that's what kept me from probably ragging on her, because she played this game a lot. She made me promise not to say, I was sworn to secrecy. I can't tell you how many games she played, but I can tell you that she was a world-class free cell player. And the way I know this is that when she would work as an occupational therapist, for those of you in the audience who are in the medical business, you know it's far more stressful than it needs to be. And she would come home and she would oftentimes play a couple hours. And I frankly was unconcerned with that because she was so productive otherwise, and she did kind of obsess over her patients. When she was a home healthcare aide or home healthcare therapist, sometimes she'd be the only person they might see in a 4 or 5 day period, and when she'd get back home, she'd wonder sometimes if she left this adaptive device in the right place in the bathroom or something like that. So she kind of took her work home with her, and Free Cell helped kind of shut that down. Now, sometimes she'd win games in minutes, and I don't even know how to play freestyle, so I can't even really describe it to you. And then there were other times she encountered games that she would hammer on for 2 or 3 days, in like 2 to 3 hour segments, and she would win the game. So over the course of her freestyle career, she encountered 2 games that she couldn't win, and this is out of a total somewhere above 180,000, because she kept a log. So I've still got her laptop. The laptop it's a PC laptop, so it's got the touchpad and 2 buttons, and the left-hand button has actually been worn through the rubberized coating. So she won over 180,000 games. She could not beat 2 games, and when I Googled those games were not beatable. So that's why I think she's probably one of the best freestyle players in the world. Let's see. I turned my pages the wrong way. Sorry about that. This is the first time I've done one of these, and to be frank, it's a little stressful. And since we're on the area of little-known facts, I'll give you something for the too much information category. And that's that I brought a separate pair of dress slacks in case I wet myself up here. And I can tell you that so far, so good. Another little-known fact is that Ilene was range qualified on the 9mm Glock Model 17. She could shoot. She had a peculiar shooting style that when the cartridge cases would eject, they'd thump her in the forehead. So she wasn't really a baseball cap wearer, but when she was at the range, she'd have to wear one like this, and then the cartridge cases would bounce off her hat. So, and to be frank, if she hadn't have married me, she probably wouldn't be a handgunner. So it's not like this is any kind of a pathos in the Fukuda family. This is strictly at the feet of the Blackburns, so don't hold that against her. She was a lifelong student, and she was a really good student, not just because of her native intelligence, probably pretty high IQ. She had good powers of concentration and attention, which might have even been honed by freestyle for all I know. And she always took training that had some sense of application, that in some way that she could apply it, usually in some healing art. She had 2 favorite healing arts. One was called Jin Shindo. It's a Japanese acupressure that would work on meridians of the body. And the other healing art that she preferred was one called therapeutic touch, as organized by Koons and Krieger. There are relatives of Koons in the audience here today. Therapeutic touch, interestingly enough, doesn't involve actual physical touch. It works around the fields of the body, and it's one of the few healing arts that I know of that's been subjected to peer-reviewed, randomized, double-blind studies, constructed pretty cleverly to test it. Her major influences, in terms of her philosophic outview, she was raised in the Methodist Church. Her family were members of Blaine Memorial Church in Seattle. Still a kind of a soft place in her heart for that, but on the peninsula, she hasn't been a member of that church, but she had very fond memories of it shaping her as a child. She was very fond of the 13th century Persian mystic poet Rumi. She really liked Ram Dass, and we saw Ram Dass on several occasions. She was also influenced by an Indian teacher, Nisargadatta Maharaj, who, interestingly enough, passed away on Ilene's birthday in 1981. She was fond of Eckhart Tolle, and she was especially fond of Byron Katie. And it's a Byron Katie quote on the front cover was kind of Ilene's go-to quote for the last year of her life. Is when you're confronting body death, that's kind of where the rubber meets the road in terms of belief systems. And Ilene chose to see that God is everything and God is good. and she didn't really discriminate against any religions. She felt that there were many pathways to God. Not everybody believes that, and she was quite okay with what they believed as well. And I should also mention, too, that as one of her major influences, I'm going to name the bookstore manager from the Quest Bookshop on Capitol Hill, Linda Shields. Linda is the person that brought both Byron Katie and Eckhart Tolle onto our radar years before they became popular. So Linda really has a knack for that, and we're forever thankful for her influence in our life. As an adult, Ilene had professional memberships, certainly, as an occupational therapist, and she only maintained one other membership, and that was with the Theosophical Society. Kind of an old group established back in the 1800s. They favor the comparative study of religions, and their motto is, "There's no religion higher than truth." Ilene saw the Theosophical Society kind of as a bridge across disparate belief systems that sometimes fight amongst themselves, but she took kind of an overview. And when I positioned the symbols on the right side of the inside of the program, the Theosophical Society symbols in the center to represent it as what she perceived as a bridge. I also, little known fact is that I thank Ilene every day for extending my life, and it's not just metaphorically said or because she really fed me well. She was an excellent chef, but 3 years, 3 months, and 2 days ago, I did something so bad that probably fewer than 5 people in the room knew that it even happened. It's not something I bragged about, but I was in a really stressful time of my life. It was kind of an acute convergence of a number of circumstances that long dissolved. And I'd probably gone without sleep for about 35 or 40 hours. And I've always been a really good driver, and Ilene and I have done a number of road trips in the years. We've driven from Seattle to Montreal to Florida and back, and we've driven a second trip. We went to Toronto and to the East Coast and back. So she always trusted my driving. So that particular Saturday, we had gone to the Hood Canal for a function for her workmates, and no alcohol, no drugs, nothing like that, and I felt pretty normal, and we were coming back on a road called the Belfair Highway. It was thick with traffic, 60, 65 miles an hour, tailgating as most people do, and we're driving along, and Ilene noticed that our 2,400-pound Toyota was starting to drift a little bit, and she touched the steering wheel. Well, she looked over at me, and she saw me go like this. So I actually passed out at the wheel. She touched the steering wheel. That was enough to bring me back into consciousness. So all this happened within a second or two. It shook me probably for months. It never eroded her confidence in my driving. We kind of worked out a system after that where I became, I thought I was pretty self-aware at the time, but my ability to kind of self-monitor just got a lot better. And so we had our 2,400-pound car heading towards a 6,000-pound Ford pickup.